the big change in the media business is that in the 70s and 80s, the the financial model was you were trying to get the entire audience. So if you were producing the nightly news for CBS, your strategy was you wanted to create a newscast that everybody in the family could watch. From the crazy right winger to the left wing kid who's in college, like everybody gets around the table, they all watch the news. It's kind of a unifying experience, or at least it's an inoffensive experience. What happened
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons in the 90s and 2000s was that that no longer became feasible. And the news strategy, which was symbolized by Fox, was to let's pick a demographic and let's try to dominate the demographic rather than try to get everybody. Let's say, let's get all the conservatives, and especially the older rural to suburban conservatives who have a lot of disposable income. They'll make a great advertising base. We'll feed them news stories that they like, about the good old days being worn away. We'll scare them with pictures of non-white criminals and immigrants and liberals on campus, and that became their financial formula. It was very successful for them. But when you ask where does it go back to, I think it starts with that, because what happened organically was when all the conservatives went over to Fox and to Rush Limbaugh and places like that, everybody else kind of by default went to those other places. So, PBS, NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, they all became, almost overwhelmingly, their audience was Democratic. So if you look at the numbers by like media sort of watchdog organizations like the Pew Center, you'll see that it's almost exactly, it's like the numbers for Republicans at Fox are exactly the same as the number for Democrats at MSNBC. Or the New York Times. So that's where we are. It's the business model is pick an audience, feed them stuff that they're gonna like, and just keep doing it.
Right. No, I mean, it's interesting to see how that's developed. Certainly in my lifetime, that's the only kind of news that I remember watching.
Which is
So
interesting to me because I meet all these people like you who don't know any other way that it's ever been, and it's so bizarre because when I was a kid and when I watched my father do the job, it was totally the opposite. So
yeah, it's weird. How intentional and organized is this gang of this blob of people inventing the narrative of public life?
So I think I struggled with this for a long time because at the level of reporters, I mean, there's no like commissar who comes down and like gives you the order on what the narrative of the day is. That stuff is largely internalized. It comes from a lifetime of interacting with editors. So by the time you get to the point of being in a position to write a front page story for the New York Times or a cover story for Rolling Stone in my case, or whatever, you've already internalized the values of the business to the point where what's a story they like and what's a story they don't like. Now, what was fascinating for me as a young reporter when I was first going out, particularly on the presidential campaign story, because I got to I was on the bus, right? Like there really is a bus, or a plane, and I would sit with people who were the most influential political reporters in the country, and I would listen to them talk about which candidates they were going to decide to take seriously and which ones they were going to describe as fringe, which ones they were going to describe as electable, which ones they liked, which ones they didn't like, which ones they were already settling ahead of time on the themes that were likely, like the way they would frame it is they would be talking amongst themselves about, well, here's what's going to hurt this candidate or that candidate, right? Um, they would say things like, well, Dean is he's too pointed, he's too far to the left. This is Howard Dean they're talking about in
Yeah.
2004,
Yeah.
right? So, and I remember this because I was invited on this tour around the country with the Dean campaign. It was called the Grassroots Express, where Howard Dean was trying to introduce himself to the National Press Corps and was kind of hoping to get a solid footing with the reporters by giving them a lot of personal access. But on the very first day of the trip, in the back of the plane, I was listening to all the reporters talking about all the things they were going to, all the different ways they were going to beat the crap out of the guy. And the reasons basically weren't that he was, well, there were, mainly it was because he was a critic of the war, but the other really big thing that he had done to arouse the ire of the political establishment was that he had an alternative way of raising money that was not acceptable. Like, he was going directly to people through the internet. This was a new thing at the time. Bernie did it
Right.
very successfully in
Grassroots.
2020. Yeah, exactly. That had never been done before because and the reason that's significant is because the donors had always had complete control over the candidates. Like, if you couldn't get all the big donors, you weren't going to be the nominee. That's just the way it worked. Dean
Right.
was actually leading in the polls without getting any of those big donors, which was, a major no-no. So the reporters, they didn't frame it in those terms, but they were talking amongst themselves saying, yeah, I think he's just too far to the left. And then I would watch, them interacting with him throughout the rest of the trip, and 50 times a day he would get these questions like, so do you think you're too far left for the average American? And he would answer it fine for like the first 100 times, and then eventually he would start to lose his patience, and then they would say, see, he's got a personality problem. And that's how they do it, like it's like high school. It's a bunch of people get together and they just kind of decide that some people are cool, some people aren't, and they got very addicted to this power to decide who gets to be in and who gets to be out. And that's
Right.
what was so fascinating about Trump, is that they decided right away that he was unacceptable and he won anyway, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons they can't stand him so much.